Hey, how's it going? It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, thank you for that kind introduction. I run a creative agency out of downtown Salt Lake called Underbelly. So, as a designer, I love spending way too much time choosing just the perfect font and typography and making sure everything's perfect. And then, of course, with anything technology, this is going to be an adventure because they didn't load correctly. But that's okay. I hope to make this time worth your while. So, I would love to just ask. What makes these kind of talks interesting to you all, and how do I like? What are you looking forward to today? Like, how do I make the best use of our time? Have there been any that really stood out, and you're like, man, when people, highlight these things, or this is what interests me? Does anybody have anything comes to mind?
I think the biggest thing for me is like interaction, like throughout the presentation.
Okay.
So questions about like maybe a point you're trying to bring across, and then we kind of discuss a little bit, and then keep moving. I don't want to interrupt you or your the presentation if it's pretty lengthy, but that's something that I feel like really immerses all of us.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. That would be awesome. Please feel free to interrupt, jump in. I know how it can go after having a really good hamburger and French fries at lunch, and then that like after lunch session is pretty sleepy for me. So hopefully we can interact. So if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. Just raise your hand or don't, and just yell over me. But I'll try and jump in and jump into the topic. So. I am a father of two girls, husband, business owner. I started a few businesses. Actually took some classes here way back when. But I kind of got my start working probably one of the world's coolest jobs, not too far down the road from here, scanning documents. And it was a small startup. There was just like a couple owners working out of this really ghetto like warehouse. And they, for some reason, taught me and let me experiment with spreadsheets and showed me how all that stuff works. So I was able to like see how they grew their business, watching them as like small business entrepreneurs. But myself in particular, I love doing like drawing, doing videos and photography. And so fast forward a few years later, I was able to learn a little bit more about Photoshop and really grow that company to, gosh, like probably 10 or 12 people, and really was able to see like the business economics of pages scanned per hour. So it really was a very boring job, but it was kind of cool to see how many boxes you could scan in a day that moved from this side of the room to that side of the room. But what I did really learn is that I wanted to do something that was brought a lot more fulfillment. I loved seeing how they were entrepreneurs and grew the business, and they were able to take me to the chamber meetings and all sorts of stuff. But at one point, because I didn't have a college degree at the time, and they ended up bringing in somebody to put over me, and so I saw all my opportunities just vanish. So I was like, what could I do that allowed me to enjoy the upside, not get kind of screwed over because of all the effort I put into it. And honestly, the person they hired played this weird train game in the back room and took credit for the work of me and the team. So it was like a terrible experience, but I still respected their desire to grow the business to somebody with the right skills and skill sets and capabilities. So fast forward, I switched into design, but with that love of entrepreneurship, started doing a bunch of different things, whether it was, has anybody heard of Black Chandelier? No? All right, it's definitely before your time. It was this like LA fashion stylist. He was on like America's Next Top Runway Model. I don't know, whatever it was, some big like drama show. But he like brought crazy LA fashion to Salt Lake City, and somehow I got hired as a designer to do the T-shirts and the advertising. He had these like cockroaches that they would be jewel, and they would sell those and ship those everywhere. It was like a fashion thing, and it would like be a pet that was on a little chain. It's like very weird. Then from there went into doing ads and graphic design for Little Caesars and Ruby River and Sizzler and all sorts of like restaurant chains, to the health industry, then later Ancestry.com. So anyway, a big range of design, as well as back in the MySpace days, that's when I kind of learned how to do development. And so from there, me and my wife wanted to go down to Latin America and serve on a mission, doing social work and helping people there. I saw like the vision of like helping people who have a lot of need, and helping people who are already there do the things that they do best, which is not connecting with people in the States. And so what I wanted to do was use like the design and the development and the tech skills to help people who were like doing awesome stuff there already. So we did that for about a year. And then ultimately I realized I'm terrible at raising support and money. So we ran out of money and came back. And that's where it really got into like user experience design, as well as started doing more with Underbelly. So this is us in Australia. One thing I love about working in tech and design and owning our own business is there's lots of opportunities to travel. So we got to go, this is like right before the fires and the pandemic and the whole world went sideways. So I try to keep a good work-life balance. Being a business owner, a lot often falls on our plates. We started a couple startups that didn't work out. We also started a salon that's still around today called Salt City Curl Co. Looking for opportunities like for my wife and trying to, build into those. But for me, I've always like seen a lot of people talk about work-life balance, and for me, it's really hard because people say like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that's kind of true, but it kind of misses the mark that it's still work. And so for me, what I love about the position I'm in is being able to try to really find how to integrate my family into work. Like if I think before like the Industrial Revolution, like, or my grandpa was a farmer, right? And so that's how he grew up. And so kids would be with their parents all day long, every day, and they would just learn. And so they were just integrated, like you're part of that school system. So I don't know, there's something interesting there. And so what I try to do is like integrate my kids, like bring them to work. This is in our maker space. With Underbelly, we work in the digital space all the time. So we have like a large format printer. At one point we have a 3D printer and all sorts of tools, like everything you need to like bring your idea or like some branding or a new packaging, bring it into the real life. And so I'll bring my girls and they are making, our logo is like a whale. And so they're like getting experience at a very young age of drawing logos and what it means. And yeah, of course, you can't really see it. There's a little Bill cipher there. So it's pretty fun. But yeah, so for me, I'm trying to figure out like, how do I not burn out, which has been a really hard few years with so much change. But yeah, I don't know, there's integrating family into it is an interesting thing. So we're relatively a small team. We're made up of mainly like designers, developers, illustrators, and then of course we've got some of the business roles like Brenda, she's our controller, bookkeeper. Kit is a studio assistant. She was like kind of a design intern. She just got promoted to a junior designer. But yeah, a couple of years ago, we were close to 40 people. We use a lot of contractors as well, but at the time we were like 40 people. So like as a business owner, trying to just figure it out, fake it till you make it. 2 years ago, my days were just spent in trying to hire the right fractional CFO and trying to get the right HR person. And I wasn't doing any design. And so it's not a bad thing. I was really just designing the business. But it looked very different than what it does today because we're a lot smaller. We're doing a lot of work with some big companies. And that's definitely shifted. Of course, like there's AI and all sorts of things shifting in the market. But ultimately, we're a bunch of creatives that can do a whole bunch of things. And I'm a generalist kind of by trade. I love photography, love video, all sorts of stuff. So you kind of see that through the type of work that we do. So Underbelly, as a small creative agency, we have three kind of areas of service. One that's just like digital products, which we build like mobile applications, web applications. So if you need a website and it's not just a brochure of like your company's information online, but you actually want it to do stuff for you, that's kind of where Underbelly comes in. We like to make things that are more complex, really integrating with the latest and greatest like technology. So like it's been really fun playing with AI and things like that. To brand. So a lot of small businesses need to get up and going. Like maybe you need a logo, maybe you need some collateral or a menu for your store, all sorts of stuff. But then, of course, there's no good websites. There's no real good brand without good content. And this whole market and landscape is completely changing lately with just the way that people are creating, which is both fun and challenging because at the end of the day, we just sell hours, but we've got to stay on top of all these trends and technology. So at one point, a couple of years ago, we had even a small content team. So we've got a couple red cameras, if anybody knows. Does anybody know what a red camera is? Yeah, so it's like really good camera, records raw, but then to do that, you need good lighting, you need lots of hard drives, because it's like, there's just a lot. So the more you grow, the more you need, the more people you need. And yeah, I don't know. I think what I was trying to do when I started to get into doing the content as well is like bring down the cost of film. But then once I got into it, I realized I've got to have people carrying the lights and carrying the poles. And wait, now it's just as expensive as hiring a video production agency. So anyway, we've done some fun stuff. So this probably won't play for you all online very well, but this just gives you an idea of some of the type of work that we do. So we worked a lot with Facebook, building out some brands for them, working out the news feed, as well as like a bunch of the business tools. And there's lots of other startups that we've partnered with, just building some of the visuals for that. Ultimately, we bring people's ideas to life in crazy ways. During the pandemic, we worked with a local ski company who shifted their focus to building some masks, building out some videos and a website for the launch of like BibleProject.com, as well as like traveling to every national park with another agency and Kia and Nat Geo. That was a fun project where they were trying just basically like shooting their cool new cars in all the different national parks. So lots of crazy fun stuff. When it comes to branding, we love to really get into the strategy and build out, like really figure out what are the brand characteristics and then how do those play into the shapes of the logo, as well as the color that we choose for the brand. Typically, we build out style guides, mood boards, and collateral, everything to like help you or help the business envision what they're going to look like in the short term, as well as the long term, as well as like how do we do that in a way that speaks to the target audience of that brand or the product. So this was a Honeycomb Bakery. Has anybody been to, oh my gosh, what's it called? The Coffee Garden? Yeah, all right. Video of the Coffee Garden, I like it. It's a great coffee shop over on 9th and 9th. But anyway, the lady who started this company back in the day, she does all of their pastries. She's awesome. We've also done Fat Cats. Anybody been to Fat Cats? Okay, there's a couple more hands. Nice, I love it. I've only been once, unfortunately. But we helped refine their logo, build out all of their collateral, like in-store, as well as like, you'll still see some of the old logo. It's a little bit more busy, but it's been pretty fun because they've reimagined their entire brand to shift from like the original location to this much larger concept, trying to get people off their screens and into their space to watch the screen, but to also like have fun as a family. And it's kind of cool what they're doing. It's been a really fun project working with them. We've also worked with some nonprofits. We got to work with Tracy Aviary, Bicycle Collective, And this is the VOA. There's a new recovery on Redwood Road, just a little bit ways off the street. So we got to do that branding. So yeah, we do very large projects for enterprises like Degree and larger, all the way down to small startups. It's really hard to serve a market like that though, because the budgets that the company and my team is used to with enterprise, it doesn't work when you're trying to get something done for a small business. So that's one thing I'd say I'm learning is like, how on earth do I create systems and processes that both work for such a broad range? And I think when people, which I resist because I am such a generalist and I think I can do everything, which is not true. When they say like niche down and find your niche or like find your target audience, it is a lot easier to build a business and scale when you do narrow. So this was a larger scale website for Degree. We've also done a couple small, this is just a single page landing page for a PR firm out of the Bay Area. They work with a lot of the most leading like tech companies. And then occasionally we get to do some fun projects. Like this was Boosted Boards e-commerce website. Unfortunately, they went out of business a couple of years ago, but it was a really fun project. I learned a good lesson about managing your accounts receivable because when they went out of business, they sent us skateboards instead of paying our bill, which you can't really keep the lights on. But we got a lot of skateboards and a couple of scooters, which is fun. But now the batteries are dying and I can't get replacements, so that sucks. Anyway, yeah, most of these people went to Rivian, so hopefully they're doing better at Rivian. Was that?
Probably.
Probably. It seems like it. I don't know. Never, but so there's two sides to graphic design that we kind of do and development. Like there's a small to mid market, which is most of everything I've shown. But then there's the part of the market that is typically reserved for enterprise because it just costs so much and takes so much time to build applications and software that is smart and really disrupts the market. So when it comes to like user experience design or development, where Underbelly is a little bit unique compared to most marketing agencies out there. We don't do advertising. We don't do just typical agency work. Really, we're what's called like a digital agency or digital UX agency. So what we'll do is we really get in and figure out what's the models and the integrations and build out software that, you know, it typically looks like, you know, list views and all sorts of crazy user flows and things like that. This is an example for a little promo for a project that we did with Facebook, where you used to be able to buy movie tickets directly in the app. And so we were able to work with the teams there, and we had a couple designers just iterating with their dev teams internally to build out, okay, where do we put this in the menus? How do you navigate inside there? And how does that integrate with the different limitations from Fandango and Atom and tickets and all sorts of stuff. So it was a really fun project. Yeah. This is another project we did with Netflix. You won't find it on our case studies, but we did a bunch of work with them to do their jobs.netflix.com URL. This was an ideal project for Underbelly because we got to mix both design and development, as well as we even flew out to their facilities and like took these pictures and, you know, captured, you know, video because Netflix is so big, they have so many different locations, and each one has a different space and a different feel. Obviously, we didn't travel all around the world, but we did find a bunch of materials and really like took those pictures and graphics that really made them look more appealing than maybe some of the other larger enterprises. It was a really fun one. So, man, what does it look like in a day in a life at Underbelly? It's just always changing. I think sometimes it's typically get in, we do a Monday morning stand up and really trying to be inspiring to the team from a graphic design and visual stance. But then as an owner, also trying to figure out, okay, how are we doing as far as the pipeline? How much sales do we have? What's the probability that we're going to close those? as well as like trying to lead the leadership team. When we're 36 people, you're just big enough where you start needing some of these typical business roles and positions, but you're not big enough to afford them all. So it's this really hard spot as a business owner where you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions and there's a lot of demands on your time and attention. And it's really difficult to get over that hump. So I'd say Underbelly is probably in a spot where we've scaled down a little bit as that Facebook and large enterprise work has kind of tailed off. And we're retooling a bunch to try and be able to grow, but this time a little bit more sustainably. But throughout that week, typically we'll have a crit midweek where all the designers and developers get together. We all show what we're working on, get feedback internally before we show it to clients, typically on a Thursday or a Friday. At any given day, you can see some photo shoots or videos shoots happening. Typically on Fridays, we go out for lunch. But behind the scenes, since you guys are a business class, there's a lot of like, man, when I got into this, I didn't even know how to like read the 3 financial statements and read my P&L and see what my cash flow is or understand what a balance sheet is. But as we've grown, I've realized like how important that is, because if I don't manage that AR, cash flow is going to start to get hit. So it's really important to understand those things. But at the same time, those things are not inspirational to a bunch of creative folk. So figuring out how to communicate the impact is like a real challenge and an ongoing challenge. But ultimately, there's a lot of different tools we will use. So to help me manage this, doing a lot of QuickBooks as well as Asana and Trello and Google Sheets and Slack and all sorts of stuff. I think the challenge in our day and age with a lot of companies is all of these tools have a lot of good information, but they don't talk to each other. And so when we got up to a larger team size, I saw that there was a lot of people on the team that were copying data from one spreadsheet and moving it over to another one. And that's really kind of inefficient, as well as going into weekly meetings where people are just giving a status update rather than us saying, okay, we know where everything is, like work asynchronously with the update, with the information we have, and then just immediately working on the problems as a business. So we've improved a bit of that. And I'd say that would be one bit of advice that I would say is figuring out those meeting rhythms and figuring out a style that works for you and your team. But get past the data and get past the status updates and get into the problems as quickly as you can. Any questions so far? So I think there's some missing fonts. I don't know, but we'll roll with it. So as far as like preparing for the job, probably not I don't know. There's a lot that I can hit on, but I think at the end of the day, when we look to hire either a designer or an operations person or something like that, what I'm looking for and what my team is looking for is basically the ability that people have had in the experience. So getting out of college, people aren't going to have a lot of experience, but I've seen a lot of resumes and applications and portfolios. And even though you don't have experience on the job, like you can still create experience. So here's an example. When I first got into my design career, I was working at a call center down in like South Jordan. And I knew that I wanted to go into design. I had some experience doing like Photoshop and a bunch of stuff, but I had no portfolio. But what I saw is that there was one person in the creative department, and I saw her just like in the distance. I didn't know her. She was like running around like super crazy, overwhelmed, stressed out. And I was like, man, if I could just help her out, I know how to use these tools. So I'm like, I'm just going to approach her one day. So I did. And I stopped her, and she's like, kind of, it was almost like 2 classes. There was like the people on the phones, which is us. And then there was like the executive suite and the creative, the head of the creative department. But she was so sweet. She stopped and she's like, yeah, okay. Like she gave me just a couple of minutes. I was like, I know how to use a lot of these tools and you seem really busy. Can I help you? Like I'll work extra or whatever. And she kind of stops. She like looks at me and is like, bring me your portfolio tomorrow. And I was like, Oh, okay. So I went home and I immediately was like, what the heck did I just do? I don't have a portfolio. I have not done these things. I've tried to like done some coffee shop stuff. I've done like a couple things here, and there, but nothing that would warrant giving me a job. So I went to Costco, bought like a flat of Red Bull and just like stayed up all night. And I made up like a brand for, an auto company and this and that, like a whole bunch of fake companies. And then I showed up the next day and I was like, okay, here it is. And my eyes were probably like bloodshot and it's probably jittery from all the Red Bull. But I was like, here's my portfolio. I have to be honest, not a lot of it's real, but I want you to see what I'm capable of. And she probably could tell I did it all in one night. So maybe that was a good thing or not. I don't know. But she like looks at me and she's like, all right, you have 1 week. Let's see how you do. So she gave me like a week, and from there it turned into more and more and more. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. So regardless of what field you're in, I think showing that you can use the tools is a big thing. We've had some students directly out of college. Some of our best students have come directly from college, and when we went to like portfolio reviews, what really stands out is there's a lot of people have portfolios or a body of work, whether it's creative or not, that is very general and people are still figuring out what they want to do. But the more people narrow, like the one girl, Autumn, she did the oh my gosh, the Facebook movies kind of video. She was in that. She actually works at the Post now. Her portfolio stood out so much in that everything she did was like kind of digitally based. So some fake apps and fake like a website that had to do with an app idea. Like everything was like apps and things that do something. It wasn't like a bunch of logos on cups and things like that. So I knew that she wants to do this type of very specific work. So the more specific you can be when you're trying to apply for a job or highlight your skill sets, it's really going to stand out. So saying no to something can sometimes be like saying no to something in your application or your portfolio can sometimes be just as powerful as including something. So those are the things that we'll look for when we're hiring somebody for our team. When it comes to operations roles, yeah, I've hired a lot of project managers, some operations people, and um, sometimes showing how people have managed a tough situation outside of being directly applicable is just as powerful as somebody saying, hey, here's how I've managed this huge, large project. And so I just want to encourage you all to just feel free to tell a personal story about how you've applied yourself in these areas. And the more you can, of course, introduce what you've learned in school or your passions and skill sets and the tools you use, the better. Additionally, another thing is speaking. So that's another thing. So when we look at hiring somebody for a junior role versus a very senior role, I put a lot of thought and talked to a lot of people about what's the difference there. And it kind of applies to a lot of different industries, but like when you're hiring somebody for a very much more junior role, they're going to work well within a system that's predefined for them. And so if you demonstrate that you can do that, great, you might get hired for that. But as people progress, we want to start seeing that somebody's giving talks and talking about different areas and subject matters. And so the more you can introduce those, it will also help you stand out. As well as I always ask people, so be prepared for it. If you ever do apply for a position at Underbelly or something like that, is what are your sources of inspiration? I like to hear directly, like, oh, I listened to this podcast, I read this book, I'm reading this book now. The more of those things and be specific you can be, that I know that you're living and breathing that industry, that role, you name it. So, bits of advice. At the end of the day, though, we look for skill sets. I look for culture fit and what your mission is, because I know that I'm taking Underbelly one direction and it may not be the same as yours because we don't really do advertising. We may not do a whole bunch of brand work. Or maybe I want to scale it for an exit. And maybe you want to be a lifestyle, digital agency. I'm not saying that's the case, but those are things to consider. As well as really just that alignment with the role. Like I might just have, I might be hiring for a junior role and you might be more senior. So oftentimes we pass over people just because it's not the right fit at the right time. Yeah. So there's, at the end of the day, I would say there's a lot to it right now. I don't have a lot of this in the presentation as far as just the shifts that are happening. There's a whole bunch going on with AI, and it's kind of exciting because I love, personally, I love designing. I think everybody's a designer. You're just not always designing with Photoshop or Figma or tools like that. But you are designing systems that people work in. And it's a really exciting time because while AI might take our jobs because it's like 100,000 times better and faster in ways at rendering some artwork or creating content and copy, I think it also opens the door to designing a new, I don't know, how do I say this? A new type of product where it's not people going into apps pushing buttons, but it's apps actually doing things for us. And how we interact with that and what we do with that is that's a lot of design work. It just doesn't look like drawing rounded rectangles and calling them buttons. So instead of that, we're designing like, okay, what data do we have access to? What images do we have access to? How do we combine those in a way that's actually like moves the ball forward every time we take a second of somebody's time, which is way better than just like helping Facebook increase engagement time by like 2 seconds or something. So it's a really exciting time. So it's really like removing the drudgery from work. So some of the things we are doing right now is, has anybody been hit up by like a whole bunch of like, I don't know, spam emails that you can tell are AI? Yeah, so they're starting to become through like crazy. Lots of sales teams or people are just like using it to just fill up our inboxes. Well, on the reverse side, I don't see a lot of people doing like, okay, as an agency owner, I don't have a lot of time to respond to a lot of these. And there've been times where I've hired a marketing person or a salesperson, and they have the expectation that they respond to all those. But that's a lot of money for a salary to respond to all those. And a lot of those are just spam, or some of those don't work out. Maybe it's not our ideal fit, or maybe they're like, they don't have the budget yet. Well, now, when those leads come in to Underbelly, like we're using AI in the background to kind of like look at our portfolio, look at what we offer, look at what they're asking for, and kind of generate that initial response, which just, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't change anything. I'm not spitting out a message that somebody hasn't filtered through human eyes, but it is saving us, you know, a good couple minutes every time we get a new email. So it's kind of removing the drudgery, because I don't love the work of sales. I love helping people articulate their visions and getting them there through creativity. And so it's kind of cool to see like, what is the drudgery in a business or in a creative industry, and how can we leverage the latest technology? So it's kind of an exciting time. But yeah, that's Underbelly. It's kind of where we're headed. Any questions? Yeah.
Why did you pick the name Underbelly?
The name that's a good question. Good question. Why did I pick the name Underbelly? Well, it's kind of a long story, but in summary, I was out kayaking one day. It was like sunset, and I kind of saw this shadowy shape, and this whale jumps over the kayak. No, I'm just kidding, dude. I wish it was that epic. No, I grew up in Utah. I love to surf, and I love the water and the ocean, and so I knew that I wanted something to be memorable. And as I was working at different like companies, whether it be Ancestry.com or just a bunch of different companies around town, in between each of those jobs, I was always doing freelance, and I had named it Anthony Lagoon Design at one time. That was a bad idea because at the time I had this like hamburger phone. I was like, it would ring, and I'd be like, Anthony Lagoon Design. This is Anthony. So don't name it after yourself unless you're willing to do that. But each time I was relatively successful, so I knew that the success of the business or that endeavor really relies on the quality of our work and the relationships we build in the process. So I knew that I could name it whatever I want. And one of the things that Jared Gold from Black Chandelier, he was all about, he's just this crazy character. He was like, people in the world are just bored. And they're just waiting for somebody to like bring something interesting into their lives. And that was like before like social media, TikTok and all that. I don't know what he would say now. But that kind of stuck with me. And so went through a bunch of creative branding exercises and ultimately was like, you know what, if I can't get a client or if we don't end up working with somebody, I at least want to leave them with a weird thought or a moment or a chuckle or confusion. I don't know. Leave a mark on somebody. And it's kind of cool too, because when you think about underbelly, which my wife actually coined the term, but I immediately fell in love with it. It's like a seedy underbelly, like it's a negative term. And when you're branding a business, when you're thinking about a brand, what is a brand? How can you leverage a brand to get into people's minds? Underbelly is kind of that. Like it's kind of this fun, happy character of this whale. And it's about creativity. It's everything opposite of what you typically think of when you think of Underbelly. So it kind of like shows what a good brand is. So anyway, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling, but thank you. Yeah.
I remember you were saying you did projects for like Facebook or for Netflix or whatever. Were those or like any other challenges that maybe even less like super challenging in particular? And how did you overcome that?
Oh man, so many challenges. I would say I learned the difference. I was trying to figure out a lot about sales. I think Underbelly was growing a lot because we were just having fun sharing our work on a regular basis. Around that time, and there'd been a couple times where like we lost a big client and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fold. I've got all these people now. So I learned a lot about contracts as well. But during that time when we started to get a lot of these larger companies, what I realized, I was trying to figure out the sales thing. Because a lot of digital agencies will scale really quick because they do great work, but they don't know the business model. They don't know their unit economics. They think that they're better than just selling a very billable hour, which I love that idea. But at the end of the day, when you're growing fast and you don't need to control your costs, that's fine. But when you start running into trouble, like hard times, you've got to control your costs, and really your costs come from labor, which is an hour, right? Unless you're using contractors and it's a different thing. So I've kind of been on this mission to figure out sales and marketing and this engine for creative agency. And so I had a salesperson who did, I would say his background was more account management, and he did really great at landing and expanding. So for enterprise work, that's one thing I learned is that having a good account manager, you build those relationships that the sales cycle for that type of work, like you might talk to a person, you know, in January, and it might not close for a year to 2 years later. That's the sales cycle for those large enterprise work. So there's a lot of red tape. Maybe you talk to somebody now, but it's going to be a couple of years before they're in a position where they can hire you. So that there's a lot of investment there. And this person was great at that. And so from there, we started with one team, and I mean, there's so many people that work with Facebook that, you know, they would just go to a different team and then hire us. And so it kind of spread really well because we did good work, and I had somebody on my staff that was really good in like interrelationally and was able to keep up with them. But then I also learned that you got to have your sales contracts in order, because ultimately he ended up going to another agency and bringing a lot of that work with him. It was against his contract, but I don't know. That's the story for another time. So that's some of the things. I'd say the other big thing is that I knew that large client, so client concentration is a big thing. Like most companies, you don't want it to be larger than 10 to 20% of your total revenue. Facebook was 70% of our revenue for multiple years. And I knew that is a very scary thing, but a creative agency, because it's typically ours, like you should be able to scale up or down really quickly. Ultimately, we built up a big runway. We bought a building, built up a dream studio, and we're still there today. But I hate being the bad, like business owner, or not bad, but I hate being the guy that says, okay, we lost the client, so half of you guys are gone. So we held on for a long time, hoping to increase revenue and doing a bunch of different things and hiring a marketing coordinator and all sorts of different things. Ultimately, we increased the top line a little bit, but haven't increased it to where it needs to be. So the ultimate answer has still been, we need to scale down to what our average revenue has been. So that was a very hard lesson. We're kind of at that point now where we've been stabilized, and now it's like, okay, how do we want to grow? But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
What other questions do you guys have?
Yeah.
What would you say are your favorite kind of projects, like the smaller business type projects or like larger enterprise?
Middle. Is that a cop out? The small ones are great because we can sometimes get through them so quickly. So as a creative, we're doing a design and a brand, and it goes out, and you immediately see it on the front doors of the business, and you see how much value and impact it can have. Some of those smaller businesses are still around today, and they've been using the same logos and the same website for 10 plus years. And that's pretty cool. Obviously, I'd like to redo some of those, but then the budgets and the timelines are so stressful, and they expect so much. I think the really true saying is 20% of your clients give you 80% of your revenue. I'm totally rude this. 80% of your revenue and zero problems, whereas like 80% of your clients will give you 20% of your problems and give you 20% of your revenue. Are you guys confused yet? I'm totally right. Anyway, it's true that you've got to find the small ideal client, and honestly, the smaller the client, the shorter the timelines, the bigger the expectations, and it's just hard to deliver. So that's why I'd say kind of that middle market where they have a slightly bigger budget. I've realized for Underbelly, and this is kind of a recent thing, as leads come in, there's tools where we can like check an email and say, how big is the company that they're at? And I realize if they're less than 50 people, it's really hard for us to find a budget, because if they don't have that many people employed, then that means their marketing budgets aren't very large, which means it's very difficult. I don't just rule people out, but it does kind of give me an idea going into the sales calls of like, how much time am I going to spend on this? Because my time is very limited. So that middle area, typically you have enough budget to do good work. And then typically those are fun too, because as the client grows, you get to grow with them, and everybody's like, going out to drinks in San Francisco, and it's super fun. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said you had a few startups that you then didn't work out. How did you know when to stop trying to build that company?
That's a great question. One was where do I start? Where are we at? Okay, we're good on time. So one of them was, we build apps for people all the time. And so when we were doing really well, I started this thing called Underbelly Ventures, which is, hey, we're helping other people make millions of dollars. Let's try to do that for ourselves. So instead of going to a venture capitalist or a VC firm, the idea was to pull people off of creative work, because when you get scale, you can also afford to say, hey, if we're 30 people, maybe 2 or 3 people can come off of client work for a quarter or 2 quarters and build something for ourselves. So you start to have the margin to invest into your own ideas. So Underbelly Venture was this idea where everybody comes together and pitches an idea, and then we all vote on like what is the most viable business idea. But ultimately, because I'm the one who's like ultimately responsible, I was like, I will make the final call on whichever idea. But if I'm going to go against what the popular vote was, then I have to have a good reason for it. So one of the ideas was this app called Kickback, which was trying to do what Twitter has done to like microblogging, making it super easy just to put out 140 characters, but do what that did in that space, trying to apply that to referral, oh my gosh, what do you call it? Like referral bonuses or kickbacks. So on Amazon affiliate links, there's a whole bunch of affiliate link programs. So what the idea was, if you were like getting into biking, I could send you a text with a bike, and if you log onto it and buy it, then I get up to whatever the affiliate link value is. So I could get 7%, which on an expensive mountain bike, that's a few $100. And so I actually made more money from that test beta app than I've made with any other app that's out there. So it's pretty cool. And we were getting there, it was starting to grow, but then we decided to stop when we got an email from Netflix asking to do that job site. So we were like, what? So we put it on the shelf and we never picked it up. And now there's competitors in the market. So is it worth it? I don't know. That's one. I would say that's not a very good bit of advice. The other projects, we were buying a building and renovating it, and this was probably a bit better advice. So at the time we were building software for the real estate industry. So, if you're ever buying a house, or if you've seen anybody buy a house, you got to coordinate with your realtor, who coordinates with their realtor, who coordinates with the seller, and then you got to figure out what time to go, and then you have to figure out, okay, what are all the houses we want to visit, and all the different various times and locations, and figure out the best path. So this streamlined that entire process. And it was actually working. So we hired an employee. I created a separate entity and elevated like the designer who had the idea and a senior developer on the project to be partners in the company. One lesson I learned is, just because they have the idea and they want to own a company doesn't mean they want to be an entrepreneur. So when it came to like filling out paperwork or doing the drudgery of being an entrepreneur, those people did not want to do that. But I'm running Underbelly and was like, hey, let's create this business for you. Man, I wish I had that opportunity. They didn't care. Like, they just wanted to work and they wanted to have ownership and stuff. But there's other ways that you can solve that. Anyway, so we're building this app, it's growing. But as a business owner, I'm running out of cash. And I'm looking at Underbelly and it's profitable. I'm like, okay, well, every month it's like good, cash flow is good from this entity. What I didn't realize is financing cash flow going towards the equity improvements of the building was just sucking us dry. And so with those two investments going simultaneously, ultimately I had to say, okay, we got to pull the plug, because doing some deep financial work that even our like fractional CFO wasn't really calling. Like, they were just looking at Underbelly's financials saying like, you're doing great. Not looking at our financing cash flows and the impact of that. But at the same time, the Utah MLS made a deal with like, I think UtahRealestate.com, and then put out similar, much crappier products and features, but put everybody who's ever interacted with the MLS, made them users of this other competitor software. So it was like, oh my gosh. They just like gobbled up the market with this crappy software, and people love ours and they're paying for it, but we can't compete with that. And we need marketing dollars to grow. In hindsight, I should have gone for seed money, because it was an entity, it was growing. We found product market fit, but we put that on the shelf too. So does that answer your question? Sorry, it's a little bit complicated, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you mentioned Red Camera.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you knew this, but Nikon actually recently acquired Red Camera. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Would you switch to a Nikon camera if they were, capable of doing the same thing as a Red Camera?
You had to ask that, didn't you?
I did. You're all rare to talk about this stuff.
As somebody, you were the only person who raised your hand. No, as somebody who's gone back and forth with my ops guy, who's also loves cameras and photography, they're a Nikon family, and I spent years saying Canon is better. And they finally got a Canon because Nikon was shutting down some of their stuff, or hasn't been progressing. So now they're on Canon, and then now I've got all this Red equipment, and now apparently I'm the Nikon guy. So I don't know. I think it's fine. Red has come out with some really cool technology, but they operationally as a business, it's very unstable. Like, they have this like, has anybody seen the Red phone?
I have.
It's this, you can see a 3D movie with a Red phone, because they have this technology for the glass where you don't need goggles or glasses or anything. You just stare at it and it's like you can see a 3D stuff. It's super cool. But they came out with this thing and the execution, the marketing, everything was terrible. And they just killed it. So Reddit, I'd say, is notorious for having really cool machines and ideas and charging you lots for it and then not supporting it. So my hope is that Nikon will support those lines a little bit better. But yeah, good question.